Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're doing something a little different today. Usually we're looking at a concept, productivity, a historical event, maybe tech trends. Today, we are looking at a machine, a biological machine that you likely haven't thought much about since high school biology, unless perhaps you had a particularly rough weekend or a very, very heavy lunch.
It is certainly the workhorse of the body, no question.
Guilty is charged on both counts. We're talking about the liver. And I have to be honest, before I really dug into the source material for this, specifically Ganong's review of medical physiology, and that absolute doorstopper, the Guyton Hall textbook of medical physiology, I just thought of the liver as a filter, just a passive Brita pitcher, sitting in my abdomen, catching the bad stuff.
And that's the common misconception. It's not wrong, exactly, but it's like calling a supercomputer a calculator.
Right.
It just misses the sheer complexity. If you treat the liver as just a filter, you miss the elegance, really, of what it's actually doing.
And that's what we really need to unpack today. Because the sources, they paint a picture of something that is less like a simple filter and more like the metaphor that kept popping into my head was a customs house.
A customs house. I like that. Unpack that for me. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so think about the central tension of just being alive, right? You have your body, your heart, your brain, all your delicate tissues. And this internal world, it requires a pristine, stable environment. Homeostasis.
Correct. Sterile, balanced, chemically precise. That's the internal world.
Exactly. You need exact levels of sugar, the right pH, no bacteria. But to keep that whole machine running, you have to bring in fuel from the outside world. And the outside world is messy. It's chaotic. It's dirty. You eat a burger, and you're not just getting protein and carbs. You're getting bacteria, toxins, random chemicals, preservatives. Who knows what else?
Absolutely. So if you just dump that chaotic sludge directly into your heart or your brain, you'd be dead in minutes.
So you need a buffer. You need a dedicated zone, a border checkpoint, where that foreign import is inspected, processed, maybe taxed, and then repackaged before it's allowed into the domestic economy of your body.
And that is the liver.
That's the liver. The byline for this deep dive, which I literally scribbled in the margins of Guyton, is nothing enters the circulation unchanged.
That is the golden rule. It is the metabolic gatekeeper. And to really understand how it pulls this off, we have to look at it through two different lenses, which is why I'm so glad we have both of these texts in front of us today.
Yeah, let's talk about the sources for a second. We are mashing up two absolute heavy hitters of physiology.
We are. On one hand, you have Ganong. Ganong is, the molecular reductionist. It loves the enzymes, the specific transporters on the cell membrane, the nitty-gritty chemistry of the cell. It's looking at the liver through a microscope.
And then on the other side, you have Guyton and Hall.
And Guyton is the engineer. Guyton cares about the plumbing, the pressures, the flow rates, the hydrodynamics. It's the systems level view. So if Ganong tells you what the chemical reaction is, Guyton tells you how the blood actually gets to the right place to make it happen.
So our mission for this deep dive is to synthesize those two views. We're not just listing facts. We're trying to build a working model of this organ in our heads. We want to understand how it integrates circulation, metabolism, and defense all at the same time.
And that strategy is ultimately all about homeostasis. It's answering the fundamental question, how do you maintain a stable internal environment when your intake from the external world is chaotic and unpredictable?
Okay, let's get into it. And we really have to start with the architecture. Because if you don't understand the plumbing of the liver, none of the chemistry makes any sense. The way blood flows through this organ is, it's weird. It's totally unique in the body.
It is completely unique. Most organs, they represent a pretty simple loop. Artery in, capillaries, vein out. The liver just rejects that simplicity. It demands a dual blood supply.
Right, it's got two different inputs.
Two inputs with completely different personalities, you could say. First, you have the hepatic artery. Now, this is standard stuff. It's coming from the heart via the aorta. It's high pressure. We're talking about 90 millimeters of mercury, and it's carrying fresh, oxygenated blood.
Okay, so that's the life support. That's what's feeding the liver cells themselves.
Exactly. But in terms of sheer volume, that's the minor player, isn't it?
It is. It only accounts for about, 300 milliliters of blood per minute?
Correct. The real volume, the massive flow, comes from the other source, the portal vein.
The portal vein. This is the main highway coming straight from the gut.
That's right. It brings all the blood from the stomach, the intestines, the pancreas, the spleen. This blood is just loaded with the nutrients you've absorbed from your last meal, but it's also potentially loaded with bacteria and toxins.
Okay, and here is the crucial engineering constraint you mentioned.
Yeah.
This blood is low pressure.
Very low pressure.
How low are we talking?
Maybe 9 or 10 millimeters of mercury.
Okay, let's just pause there for a second. I really want the listener to visualize this. You have one pipe, the artery, blasting in at 90 pressure.
High energy.
And then you have this other massive pipe, the portal vein, just sort of dribbling in at 9 pressure.
Yeah.
And they're supposed to mix together.
It sounds like a plumbing disaster waiting to happen, doesn't it? If you just connected those two pipes directly, the high-pressure artery would immediately backflow into the low-pressure portal vein and, well, it would essentially blow out your intestines.
Which would be a very, very bad day.
A catastrophic day. So the liver has to prevent that.
How does it do it?
It uses a brilliant series of pressure-stepping mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
The arterial blood, before it can mix, passes through these very narrow resistance vessels, arterioles, that clamp down and create a huge pressure drop. So by the time the two streams meet, their pressures are much closer.
And where do they meet?
They meet in these specialized, wide-open channels called sinusoids.
Sinusoids. So these are basically the capillaries of the liver.
You can think of them that way, but they're less like narrow tubes and more like wide, flat rivers or leaky sheets. And as the mixed blood flows through these rivers towards the exit, the pressure drops even further.
How far does it drop?
By the time it leaves the liver through the hepatic vein, the pressure is almost zero.
Zero.
Practically zero. And this incredible low resistance is the whole key. It's what allows that huge volume of blood to flow through the liver without backing up. It effectively turns the liver into a big, low-pressure sponge.
Let's do the math on that flow for a second. You said 300 milliliters per minute from the artery. How much comes from the portal vein?
About 1,050 milliliters per minute.
So total, you have roughly 1,350 milliliters of blood flowing through the liver every single minute.
It's massive.
That's nearly 27% of the entire cardiac output.
At rest. Exactly. More than a quarter of every single heartbeat is dedicated to perfusing the liver. It is a huge hemodynamic load.
Now, Guyton brings up this really terrifying what-if scenario about this low-pressure system. Since the liver is essentially a soft, squishy, low-pressure sponge, what happens if the dam breaks downstream? What happens if the heart, specifically the right side of the heart, stops pumping effectively?
You get a traffic jam, a backup. This is a classic clinical presentation of right-sided heart failure. The heart can't clear the blood coming back to it, so pressure rises in the big veins, the vena cava. That pressure then transmits backward directly into the hepatic veins.
And because the liver's a sponge?
It just expands, it swells up. The liver is surprisingly elastic, and it can act as a blood reservoir. In severe heart failure, Guyton says the liver can hold an extra half a liter to a full liter of blood.
Wow. So when a doctor is pressing on a patient's abdomen and feels a hepatomegaly, an enlarged liver.
In a cardiac patient, they are literally feeling a congested blood tank. The organ has sacrificed its own geometry to buffer that dangerous pressure overload coming from the failing heart.
That's such a vivid image. It's not just inflammation in some vague sense, it's hydraulic swelling. It really highlights how the liver is an expandable venous organ.
Precisely. Its physical properties are part of its function.
So let's zoom in a bit. We've talked about the big vessels, the highways in and out.
Yeah.
Now I want to talk about the layout of the city itself, the microscopic structure, because the text described two different ways of looking at this, and it can be a little confusing at first. You got the lobule versus the acinus.
Right. This is a classic distinction in histology and, frankly, a bit of a historical debate. The lobule is the structural map, the classic way to see it. Imagine a wheel or a hexagon.
Okay.
At the very center of the hub is the central vein. That's the drain. Radiating out from that center, like spokes on a wheel, are plates of liver cells, hepatocytes. And then on the rim of the wheel, at the corners of the hexagon, you have the portal triads.
And the portal triads are those bundled pipes we talked about.
Yep.
A tiny branch of the portal vein, a branch of the hepatic artery, and a little bile duct.
Correct. So in this lobule model, blood flows from the rim, from the portal triads, down the spokes, between the plates of cells, to the drain in the center.
From the outside in.
From the outside in. That's
Yeah.
the classic histological view. It's neat, it's geometric, it's easy to see under a microscope.
But then you have this other concept, the acinus. And Ganong in particular seems to suggest this is the more functional unit.
The acinus concept is less about the neat geometry and more about the physiology of supply and demand. So instead of a wheel, imagine a cluster of grapes or berries hanging on a vascular stem.
A stem. So the stem is the blood supply.
Exactly. The stem is the terminal branches of the portal vein and hepatic artery that run between the lobules. The cells closest to that stem, they get the freshest blood.
Okay, so they're first in line at the buffet.
They are first in line. This is zone 1. It's also called the periportal zone. These cells get the most oxygen and the most nutrients. But, and this is crucial, they are also the first to see any toxins coming in from the gut.
They're the frontline soldiers.
They are the front line. Then, as the blood flows away from that stem, you move downstream to zone 2, and finally you reach zone 3. Zone 3 is the periphery of the sinus, the cells furthest from the blood supply.
Which is the area right around the central vein in the other model.
Precisely. The models overlap, and the cells in zone 3, they get the leftovers.
So they get the least oxygen.
They get the least oxygen. And this makes zone 3 the most vulnerable to ischemic injury. If your blood pressure drops, or you go into shock, or you have severe heart failure, the zone 3 cells are the first to die. They're already living on the edge of oxygen availability.
And that explains why central-lobular necrosis is such a common term you see in pathology reports for, say, shock liver. It's just geography. They're at the end of the supply line.
Geography is destiny in liver pathology. It's that simple.
Okay, let's go even deeper now, down to the walls of these sinusoid channels. We said they're like capillaries, but they're not normal capillaries at all, are they? Guyton has this great description of the liver as a sweating organ.
It is a very, very leaky organ, and that's by design. The endothelial cells that line the sinusoids, they have these massive pores in them called fenestrations. And when I say massive, I mean they're about 1 micrometer wide. In the world of cells, that is a gaping hole.
That's a barn door.
Essentially, yes. This allows not just fluid, but even large molecules, like plasma proteins, to move freely out of the blood and into the space behind the vessel wall.
And that space has a name. The space of Dis.
The space of Dissy. It always sounds like a location from a sci-fi novel.
It does, doesn't it?
But it's just the tiny gap between the blood vessel and the actual hepatocyte, the litter cell. And because of these huge pores, the fluid in the space of Dissy is almost identical to blood plasma. It's incredibly protein-rich.
And this fluid, this sweat, it drains away into the lymphatic system.
It does. And here's a statistic from Guyton that usually just stops people in their tracks. About half of all the lymph formed in the entire body under resting conditions comes from the liver.
A half, just from this one organ.
Half. And because the pores are so big, this lymph is full of protein. We're talking about 6 grams per deciliter, which is almost as high as plasma itself. No other organ produces lymph that rich.
So the liver is just constantly weeping this high protein fluid. Now, connect this back to pathology for me. We talked about heart failure earlier. If the pressure in those hepatic veins goes up, does the liver just sweat more?
It sweats profoundly more. If the pressure in the hepatic veins rises just 3 to 7 millimeters of mercury, a tiny increase, the lymph production skyrockets. The lymphatic drainage system just can't handle the volume.
So where does the fluid go?
It has nowhere to go but out. That protein-rich plasma starts sweating directly off the surface of the liver and pooling in the abdominal cavity.
And that is ascites.
That is ascites. If you've ever seen a patient with advanced cirrhosis or severe heart failure and they have that distended, fluid-filled belly, you are looking at the direct result of the liver's high permeability combined with high back pressure. The liver is literally weeping plasma into the abdomen.
That's a haunting image. But it makes the mechanism so clear. It's not just fluid retention in some vague sense. It's a mechanical hydraulic failure.
It is purely a problem of hydraulics and permeability.
Okay, so we have the architecture, we have the unique flow. Now let's talk about security. Because, as we said, that portal blood is dirty. It's full of bacteria from the gut. If that stuff gets into the main circulation, we are talking about sepsis. We are talking about death.
And this is where the Kupffer cells come in.
The bouncers.
The bouncers, that's a perfect name for them. These are resident macrophages. They're part of the body's reticuloendothelial system, but they live permanently inside the liver sinusoids. They're anchored to the walls, just sitting there, projecting into the bloodstream, waiting.
And Ganahl mentions a specific problem they have to deal with constantly, colon bacilli.
Right. Your gut is teeming with bacteria. Even in a perfectly healthy person, a small number of these bacteria are always crossing the gut wall and getting into the portal blood. If you were to take a sample of portal venous blood, it almost always grows bacteria.
Wait, really? So the blood entering my liver right now is technically septic?
Technically, yes. It's contaminated. But the blood leaving your liver is sterile. And that is the magic of the Kupffer cells.
How fast are they? How efficient is this process?
It's incredible. There are these high-speed motion pictures that have been taken, and they show that when a bacterium comes into physical contact with a Kupffer cell, it is phagocytized, completely engulfed and destroyed in less than 1/100th of a second.
0.01 seconds. That's faster than a blink.
Much, much faster. It creates this incredibly effective firewall. Guyton estimates that less than 1% of the bacteria that enter the liver from the gut survive the passage to get into the systemic circulation.
So without a functioning liver, just eating a normal meal could kill us from infection.
Effectively, yes. The liver isn't just a metabolic organ, it's the immunological firewall that protects the sterile systemic blood from the non-sterile environment of the gut.
That gives me a whole new level of respect for the filtering concept. It's not just filtering chemicals. It's actively hunting and destroying invaders at unbelievable speed.
It is active high-speed defense.
Okay, let's move on. We've cleaned the blood of bacteria, now we enter the metabolic refinery. This is where the liver takes all the raw materials, the carbs, the fats, the proteins, and decides what to do with them. Let's start with carbohydrates. The sources consistently called the liver a glucose buffer. What does that mean?
This is an absolutely critical function for anyone who eats meals. When you have a meal, especially one rich in carbohydrates, the glucose level in your portal vein blood spikes. If that massive surge of sugar hit the general circulation unchecked, your blood sugar would go through the roof.
So the liver basically skims off the top.
It does more than skim. It takes up a huge portion of that excess glucose and immediately stores it as glycogen. The process is called glycogenesis. It effectively flattens the curve of your post-meal blood sugar spike. Guyton notes that without this function, your blood glucose would rise 2 to 3 times higher than it normally does after a meal.
And then the opposite happens when I'm fasting, say overnight while I'm sleeping, or if I skip lunch.
Exactly. When your systemic blood sugar starts to drop, the liver does the reverse. It breaks down that stored glycogen, that's glycogenolysis, or if the glycogen runs low, it builds new glucose from scratch using amino acids and glycerol, that's gluconeogenesis.
So it's constantly working to keep that baseline blood sugar level stable.
It's a buffer. It absorbs the excess and releases it during deficits. It keeps the rest of the body, especially the brain, in a stable glucose environment.
Which means in liver failure, the risk isn't just that you can't process sugar correctly, it's that you have no tank. You have no buffer.
Correct. Hypoglycemia, dangerously low blood sugar, is a major, major risk in severe liver failure because the patient has lost their glucose reservoir. They are living hand to mouth. Metabolically speaking, one missed meal can be a crisis.
Now, what about fat? I think a lot of people associate the liver with fat, mostly because of the term fatty liver disease. But physiologically, what is the liver's main job with fat metabolism?
The liver is the main processing center for fat. One of its key jobs is beta oxidation, which is the process of splitting fatty acids into 2 carbon units to generate energy. And the liver does this so rapidly and so efficiently that it actually produces more energy than it needs for its own purposes.
So it's overproductive on purpose.
Yes, you could say that. It breaks fatty acids down into a molecule called acetyl-CoA, but it makes so much acetyl-CoA that it can't possibly burn all of it in its own citric acid cycle. So it has a clever solution. It condenses 2 molecules of acetyl-CoA together to form something called acetoacetic acid.
And what happens is that it gets shipped out.
It gets shipped out into the circulation. Other tissues, like your muscles and your heart, can absorb this acetoacetic acid, easily convert it back into acetyl-CoA, and then burn it for their own energy needs.
So the liver is like a central refinery, cracking crude oil, the fatty acids, into a more convenient gasoline acetoacetic acid for all the cars in the body to use.
That is a perfect analogy. And beyond burning fat for fuel, it's also building with it. The liver synthesizes most of the body's cholesterol, phospholipids, and lipoproteins, the particles that transport fat in the blood. In fact, about 80% of the cholesterol the liver makes isn't for cell membranes. It's destined to be turned into bile salts.
Which then helps you digest more fat. It's a self-reinforcing cycle.
The beautiful cycle.
But we have to touch on the pathology here because it's so common. NASH and NAFLD.
Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or NAFLD, and its more aggressive form, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, or NASH. This is really the epidemic of the modern age, closely linked to obesity and type 2 diabetes. Essentially, the metabolic machinery gets overwhelmed. There's just too much fat coming in for the liver to process or export, so it accumulates inside the liver cells.
And that accumulation leads to inflammation.
Exactly. That's the steatohepatitis part. Steato means fat. Hepatitis means inflammation of the liver. And that combination of fat plus chronic inflammation leads to fibrosis scarring and can eventually progress to full-blown cirrhosis.
So it's another example of that theme, regulation versus capacity.
Exactly. Even this massive, powerful processing plant has a capacity limit, and we are pushing it.
All right, let's turn to proteins. Guyton makes a very stark statement here. He says the body can survive for days, maybe even weeks, without the liver's fat or carbohydrate functions. But the loss of its protein metabolism functions is fatal in a matter of days.
It's incredibly urgent, maybe even hours, depending on the severity. The protein functions are absolutely the cannot live without aspect of the liver.
Why is it so immediately critical?
There are two main reasons, and they're both life or death. First, waste disposal. Second, synthesis of new proteins. Let's start with the waste. When your body metabolizes protein for energy, or when bacteria in your gut break down protein from your food, a toxic byproduct is produced. Ammonia.
And ammonia is really bad news.
Ammonia is extremely toxic, particularly to the central nervous system. It's a small molecule, it's uncharged, and it crosses the blood-brain barrier as if it wasn't even there. If ammonia levels in your blood start to rise, you get confusion, lethargy, coma, and eventually death.
So the liver has to grab it and neutralize it.
It's the only organ that can. The liver is the only organ in the body that contains the complete set of enzymes for the urea cycle, also known as the Krebs-Henselite cycle. It takes 2 molecules of that toxic ammonia and converts them into 1 molecule of urea.
And urea is safe.
Urea is relatively harmless. It's water-soluble, it circulates safely in the blood, it goes to the kidneys, and you pee it out. It's the body's primary way of getting rid of nitrogen waste. But you absolutely need the liver to make that conversion happen.
This brings us directly to that clinical box in Ganong about hepatic encephalopathy.
Yeah.
This is exactly what happens when that ammonia trap fails, right?
It's the textbook example. In severe liver failure, or in cases where blood is shunted around the liver and bypasses our customs house, the ammonia stays in the blood. It goes straight to the brain. The patient becomes confused. They might develop a characteristic flapping tremor of the hands called asterixis, and they can slip into a coma.
And the treatment they mentioned, lactulose, is interesting. It doesn't work on the liver, it works in the gut.
It does. It's a clever workaround. Lactulose is a sugar that gets fermented by gut bacteria, which acidifies the colon. This acidic environment traps ammonia as ammonium ion, which can't be absorbed into the portal blood. It essentially tries to stop the ammonia from getting into the system in the first place because it knows the failing liver can no longer clear it.
So that's the waste disposal side of protein metabolism. What about the synthesis side?
The liver makes about 90% of all your plasma proteins. The big one, the most famous one, is albumin.
And albumin's main job is to act like a sponge in the blood vessels, holding water inside, right? Oncotic pressure.
Correct. It's the primary driver of oncotic pressure. Without enough albumin, water starts to leak out of your capillaries into the surrounding tissues. So you get edema swelling in your legs and feet, and that leakage also contributes massively to the ascites we talked about earlier.
And the other big category of proteins it makes are the clotting factors.
Absolutely. Fibrinogen, prothrombin, factors 7, 9, and 10. The liver makes almost all of them, and for many of them, it needs vitamin K as a cofactor. This is why in liver failure, you don't just turn yellow and swell up, you bleed. You lose the ability to form clots.
So let me get this straight. No energy buffer, toxic brain fog, swelling up with fluid, and bleeding uncontrollably. That is a truly catastrophic system failure.
It really illustrates just how many critical plates the liver is spinning simultaneously. Take one away, and the whole system starts to collapse.
Let's pivot to something a bit more hopeful then. The liver isn't just a frantic worker, it's also a hoarder. It's a storage depot. What are we keeping in the vault?
It stores a surprising number of essential vitamins. Vitamin A is the big one. The liver stores enough vitamin A to prevent a deficiency for up to 10 months, even if you had 0 intake.
10 months. That's an incredible buffer.
It is. It also stores a huge amount of vitamin B12. We have at least a year's supply, some texts say several years' supply, stored in the liver. This is why it takes a very long time for, say, a strict vegan or someone with a B12 absorption issue to actually develop deficiency anemia. You have this massive backup battery.
And iron. The text talks about ferritin as an iron buffer.
Right. The liver acts as the body's main iron buffer. Free iron is actually quite toxic, so you can't have it just floating around. So the liver cells contain a protein called apoferritin. When iron comes in, it binds to apoferritin to become ferritin. It's like putting the iron in a safe molecular cage.
And when iron levels in the blood drop, because you're making new red blood cells.
The liver releases it from the ferritin cage. It smooths out the supply, keeping blood iron levels remarkably stable.
Okay, now I want to talk about my absolute favorite liver fact. It's the Prometheus myth. The ancient Greeks told this story of Prometheus, who was chained to a rock, and every day an eagle would come and eat his liver, and then every night it would just grow back.
And the amazing thing is, the Greeks were surprisingly accurate. The liver is the only internal organ in mammals capable of this level of significant regeneration.
What are the numbers here? It seems almost unbelievable.
In animal models, like in rats, if you surgically remove 70% of the liver, a procedure called a partial hepatectomy, the remaining 30% will grow back to the original size and mass in just 5 to 7 days.
That is it's sci-fi level regeneration. How does it know when to stop? Why don't we just end up with a giant liver blob that fills our entire abdomen?
That is the million-dollar question in regenerative biology. We know it's controlled by a complex interplay of signals. Growth factors like hepatocyte growth factor, or HGF, hit the gas pedal and tell the cells to divide. And then other factors like TGF-beta seem to hit the brakes. The liver somehow senses its optimal liver-to-body weight ratio and stops when it gets there.
But there's a big catch, right? This amazing ability doesn't always work.
That's the tragic irony. This regeneration works beautifully for acute, uncomplicated injury like cutting out a piece for a living donor transplant. But if the injury is chronic and ongoing, like from viral hepatitis or continuous alcohol abuse, the process gets disordered. Instead of rebuilding neat, functional liver plates, you get disorganized nodules of regenerating cells separated by bands of scar tissue.
And that is cirrhosis.
That is cirrhosis. And once you have that extensive scarring, or fibrosis, the regenerative capacity is severely, severely impaired.
So it can rebuild a wing of the house perfectly, but not if the foundation itself is rotting away.
That's a very good way to put it.
Let's move to our next section, waste management. We've already covered ammonia, which is a huge one,
Yeah.
but there's a lot more trash to take out. And this brings us to the concept of detoxification. We hear the word detox in marketing and wellness circles all the time, but what does it actually mean physiologically?
Physiologically, it almost always means one thing. Taking something that is hydrophobic or fat-soluble and making it hydrophilic or water-soluble.
Why is that the key step?
Because if a substance stays fat-soluble, it just gets stuck in your cells and your body fat. It would accumulate forever. To get rid of something, you have to be able to either pee it out in the urine or excrete it in the bile. Both of those are watery environments.
You have to make it water soluble first.
Exactly. The liver has a two-phase system for this. In phase 1, enzymes, most famously the cytochrome P450 system, oxidize or hydroxylate these toxins. They add a little chemical handle. Then in phase 2, other enzymes conjugate them. They attach a larger water-soluble tag to that handle. Now, the substance can be easily excreted.
And this doesn't just apply to poisons, it applies to drugs, right?
Oh, absolutely. Almost every drug you take is metabolized and cleared by the liver, but also hormones. The liver is constantly degrading and clearing hormones like insulin, glucagon, aldosterone, and the steroid hormones.
Wait, estrogen.
Yes, very much so. If the liver is badly damaged and can't do its job, it can't break down estrogen efficiently. This is why men with chronic liver disease sometimes develop signs of excess estrogen, like gynecomastia, which is breast tissue development, or spider angiomas on their skin.
That is a fascinating physical sign that points directly back to a specific metabolic failure.
It's a perfect example of connecting the molecular function to the bedside clinical exam.
Now, within waste management, we have to talk about the color of waste. We have to talk about bilirubin. This pathway is a little complex, but it is so important for clinical diagnosis.
It is. It all starts with dead red blood cells. Your red blood cells live for about 120 days. When they get old and fragile, macrophages in your spleen and liver gobble them up.
Okay.
The macrophage breaks open the hemoglobin. The heme part is converted first to a molecule called biliverdin, which is actually green, and then that is quickly reduced to bilirubin, which is a yellow-orange color.
And this early form of bilirubin is called unconjugated.
Correct. Unconjugated, or free, bilirubin. The key thing to know about it is that it is not water-soluble. It can't be peed out. It's stuck. So to get to the liver for processing, it has to hitch a ride on a protein taxi.
And that taxi is albumin.
Albumin, our friend from earlier. So this unconjugated bilirubin-albumin complex travels to the liver, enters the hepatocyte, and here is the crucial step of the whole process. The liver conjugates it. It uses an enzyme called glucuronyltransferase to stick a molecule of glucuronic acid onto it.
And now it's conjugated bilirubin. And now it's water soluble.
Exactly. It's now water-soluble and ready for disposal. It gets actively pumped out of the liver cell into the bile. From the bile, it travels to the intestine.
And what happens in the intestine?
The bacteria in your gut go to work on it. They metabolize it into a molecule called urobilinogen. Some of that urobilinogen gets further converted to stercobilin, which is what gives feces its characteristic brown color. And some of that urobilinogen is reabsorbed from the gut back into the blood, goes to the kidneys, gets converted to urobilin, and that is what gives urine its characteristic yellow color.
So the brown color of feces and the yellow color of urine are basically just the rusted out parts of old red blood cells.
That is exactly what they are, broken down heminy.
Now, let's talk about jaundice. This is what happens when this whole system backs up and you turn yellow, because bilirubin is building up in your blood. The texts make a very important distinction between two main types, hemolytic jaundice and obstructive jaundice. And understanding this is a crucial diagnostic puzzle.
It absolutely is. The key is to think about where the bottleneck is. In type A, hemolytic jaundice, the problem is upstream of the liver. You are breaking down too many red blood cells. That's hemolysis. The liver is working perfectly fine, maybe even in overdrive, but it's just overwhelmed with too much bilirubin coming at it.
It's like a traffic jam on the highway, because there are just too many cars trying to get into the city.
That's a perfect analogy. So if you test the blood, you're going to find very high levels of unconjugated bilirubin, the raw material that the liver hasn't had a chance to process yet.
Okay, so that's type A. What about type B, obstructive jaundice?
In obstructive jaundice, the liver has done its job perfectly. It has taken up the bilirubin, it has conjugated it, and it has secreted it into the bile. The problem is downstream. The bile duct is blocked, maybe by a gallstone or a tumor. The bile can't leave the liver.
So it backs up.
It backs up, pressure builds in, the tiny bile canaliculi, they rupture, and the conjugated bile leaks back into the blood. So if you test the blood this time, you'll find high levels of conjugated bilirubin.
And here's the aha moment, right?
Right.
Because conjugated bilirubin is water soluble.
Exactly. If it leaks back into the blood, the kidneys can filter it out and excrete it, so the patient's urine becomes very dark, a foamy, tea-colored yellow.
The classic foam test at the bedside.
Yes, but at the same time, because the bile isn't getting to the gut at all, there's no stercobilin being made. So the patient's poop doesn't turn brown. It becomes pale or clay-colored.
So let me put it together. Dark urine plus clay-colored stool plus high conjugated bilirubin in the blood. That points directly to an obstruction.
You've just diagnosed a biliary obstruction using pure physiological reasoning.
That is brilliant. It really is logic, not just memorization of facts.
That's the beauty of physiology.
Speaking of obstruction, let's finish up our tour by looking at the biliary system itself, the gallbladder. It's not just a passive storage bag for bile, is it?
Not at all. It's an active concentrator. The liver is constantly producing bile, which is mostly water, bile salts, cholesterol, and bilirubin. But the gallbladder takes that dilute bile and actively absorbs the water and electrolytes out of it. It concentrates the bile anywhere from 5 to 20-fold.
So it effectively boils down the sauce to make it more potent.
It thickens the sauce. Exactly. This is very efficient because you can store a lot of digestive potency in a very small volume.
Yeah.
But it's also risky.
Why is it risky?
It comes down to chemistry and solubility. You have cholesterol, which is a fat, dissolved in this watery mix. Cholesterol hates water. The only reason it stays dissolved is because the bile salts and another molecule, lecithin, form these little spheres called micelles that hold the cholesterol molecules in their core.
Like little soap bubbles holding on to grease.
Precisely. But if you concentrate the bile too much, or if your liver happens to secrete too much cholesterol relative to the amount of bile salts, the solution becomes supersaturated. The cholesterol can no longer stay dissolved. It precipitates out of solution and forms crystals.
And those crystals grow into a pearl, a really, really painful pearl.
A gallstone. About 85% of gallstones in the Western world are cholesterol stones. It's fundamentally a chemistry failure, a problem of solubility.
And the trigger for releasing all of this concentrated bile.
That's mealtime, right?
Yes. When fatty foods from your meal enter the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine, it triggers the cells there to release a hormone called CCK, or calcitonin.
And CCK does two things simultaneously. It travels through the blood and tells a muscular wall of the gallbladder to squeeze down hard. And at the same time, it tells a little valve at the end of the bile duct, the sphincter of Oddi, to relax and open up.
The sphincter of Oddi, another great name from anatomy.
It is. So the gate opens, the bag squeezes, and a jet of concentrated bile squirts into the intestine to emulsify the fats in your lunch.
It's just beautifully timed, a perfect feedback loop.
A perfect neurohormonal feedback loop.
So we have toured the customs house. We've seen the bizarre dual blood supply, the high-speed security team chasing bacteria, the metabolic refinery cracking fats and trapping toxic ammonia, the regenerating walls, and the complex waste disposal system.
It really is an astonishingly integrated machine.
I want to circle back to our mission from the beginning. We said we wanted to synthesize Genong and Guyton, the micro and the macro. What is the big picture here, the main takeaway? For me, it's that the liver isn't just cleaning the blood, it's curating the blood.
That's a great word for it. Curating. It's actively deciding what the rest of the systemic circulation gets to see. It holds back the sugar spikes. It holds back the bacteria. It holds back the toxins. It releases fuel when you're starving. It releases iron when you're low. It releases clotting factors when you need them.
So that balance we talked about, homeostasis, it isn't achieved by just being open to the world. It's achieved through selective, intelligent control.
Balance is maintained by a gatekeeper. Without the gatekeeper, the chaotic fluctuations of the external environment would completely destroy the pristine stability of the inner self.
That is almost philosophical.
Physiology often is when you get down to the principles.
I want to leave our listener with one final provocative thought, something I was mulling over when I was reading about the regeneration piece.
Go on.
The liver is the only solid organ that can grow back from a fragment. Not the heart, not the brain, not the kidneys, not the lungs. Why? Why did evolution prioritize this incredible redundancy and regenerative capacity for the liver specifically above all others?
That is a profound question about evolutionary pressures.
It suggests to me that for our distant ancestors, metabolic processing was the most vulnerable point of failure. You could probably survive a lot of things, but eating a poisonous plant, or starving for weeks on end, or getting a gut infection, those are the constant daily threats. The liver, the customs house, absolutely had to be bulletproof. It had to be able to take a hit and recover.
It suggests that metabolic flexibility and resilience was the ultimate survival advantage. The brain and heart are useless if the fuel supply is poisoned or unstable.
Something to think about next time you're debating that second glass of wine or that extra donut. Your liver is working incredibly hard for you.
Be kind to your customs house.
Exactly. And for those who want to see these structures we've been talking about, the spokes of the wheel lobule or the grape cluster acinus, I highly recommend you check out the diagrams in the texts. Figure 28:1 in Genong is particularly helpful for visualizing the acinus.
Highly recommended. It makes all difference.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.